Hello and welcome to Profiles and Issues, the Westchester Cable Television talk show that gives you in-depth interviews with prominent people in the news. I'm your host, Dennis Rudin. Our topic for this broadcast, the effect of the Democratic Blue Wave victories on the 2019 New York State legislative agenda and Westchester County. Our profile and guest on the program is State Assemblyman David Buchwald, who represents the 93rd Assembly District. And now our profile. Since arriving in Albany in 2013, David Buchwald has taken on the challenges of promoting ethics reform, integrity, and fighting corruption in government. He first introduced an amendment to the New York State Constitution to enable courts to strip government pensions from officials convicted of corruption connected to their public duties. New York State voters overwhelmingly approved his amendment to the state constitution in 2017. During this year's 2019 state legislative session, David has again been sponsoring, supporting, and voting for legislation that empowers us as citizens by protecting our self-interests and fighting for integrity in government. We are honored to welcome Assemblyman David Buchwald to Profiles and Issues to bring us up to date on current state legislative issues and challenges facing Westchester County. David, good to see you.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Thanks for having me.
Great. Okay, we have a lot of issues to talk about, so let's get right into it. The New York Truth Act. Please tell us briefly about the legislation and your role in it.
Sure. The New York Truth Act is a bill that would require the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance to release the tax returns of statewide elected officials. That's our governor, Lieutenant Governor, Attorney General, State Comptroller, our 2 U.S. Senators, and the President of the United States and Vice President, if the Vice President was a New York State resident. So almost all those elected officials release their tax returns voluntarily, but one most notably does not. That's the President, who's broken from 40 years of releasing tax returns, a precedent established first by President Nixon. And so because the President is a New York State resident, he files New York State tax returns. Those tax returns, like for any New York State resident, have his worldwide income. And there's a lot of debate in Washington about what to do. House of Representatives might be requesting those tax returns at some point in the near future. But fundamentally, we here in New York have an opportunity that no other state has because the President's only a resident of New York. And this bill would basically say within 30 days of it becoming law, the last 5 years of the current office holders' tax returns from New York State would be released for the public to examine so that we would be able to understand where the income from our top elected officials is coming from, what potential conflicts of interest they have, how much proposals to change the tax law have affected them. Those sorts of things are, I think, crucial and would be crucial not just for the current office holders, but for office holders going into the future.
That sounds great. And I say that not in a bipartisan way, but I think as a result of many of the news reports coming out, it's very clouded. People aren't sure. You know, they hear about violations of ethics, Constitution, etc., conflict of interest. But I just want to clarify it because it sounds too good to be true. A sitting president is not exempt from this?
No, this bill explicitly takes effect 30 days after
if
it passes.
He's a New York resident.
And the idea is if there are tax returns that are currently held at the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance, they would go up on a website and they'd be redacted in the sense of personally private sensitive information like Social Security numbers and so forth wouldn't be exposed, but the fundamental tax information would be made available. And as you mentioned, Dennis, I'm someone who's always stood for promoting ethics in government and open government. This is totally consistent with that, and I think it would be good legislation no matter who was in office, It's why, although, of course, many Democrats have focused on the release of tax returns, there are many Republican members of Congress who have called for the president to release his tax returns. And we've got a lot of support within the Assembly and the state Senate to get this done, but it's not just limited to the Democratic Party. I believe that fundamentally, if this bill came to a vote, there would be Republicans who would recognize that there's a broader principle here as well. It's exactly why so many top elected officials do voluntarily hold themselves accountable, recognize they're in a position of public trust, and with that comes responsibilities to the public.
All right, thank you very much for sponsoring that and getting it through. That's important. That's very important.
We haven't gotten it through yet, but we are building more and more support. And
well, when is it possible this session? Or no?
It is. We have
because this is very timely, you know.
It absolutely is. We have more than a majority of the state assembly sign on as co-sponsors, and the same is true in the state senate. Right now, we are in the middle of budget season in New York, so that takes first priority to fund budget in New York. But fundamentally, I think we should be trying to get this done, hopefully even before April 15th, which would be very appropriate.
All right, let's move on because we've got a lot of topics to talk about. All right, the next topic on everyone's mind this time of the year is taxes. Now, there's a bill out which deals with the authorization of the taxation of state land in the county of Westchester. Can you give us the status on the legislation?
Sure. This is a bill I sponsor to try to bring a little bit more sanity to the way New York State approaches whether New York State pays for property taxes on its own property. And in many places around New York State, including neighboring Rockland and Putnam County, New York State pays the local governments and school districts and county government their share of property taxes. They don't do the same throughout much of Westchester. And so this bill would remedy that and thereby help lower property taxes for Westchester residents and businesses. So something that I think is just a matter of fairness. I'm pleased to have Senator Pete Harkin, who represents Northern Westchester, as our Senate sponsor. Certainly something that I think every Westchester resident should be an advocate for.
Now, I assume it will bring more revenue for the county to help County Executive Latimer balance his budget, right?
Both for the county, and the county, by the way, both the county executive and the county legislature are supported this measure, but also for our local towns and school districts. You know, the idea that New York State pays communities, whether that's in the Adirondacks or neighboring counties, for the state land that they own, but doesn't do the same here in Westchester. In Westchester, there are prisons, there's state universities, state office buildings here in White Plains that, normally, absent this legislation, the state wouldn't pay a dime of property taxes. We think they should pay their fair share.
Okay. Are you in favor of the state legislature voting to approve the sale of county park land to a public utility called the Westchester Local Development Corporation to offset a $22 million deficit in County Executive Latimer's 2019 budget?
Well, that's something that the county executive has proposed if no other source of revenue is provided to Westchester County. If the state legislature doesn't act, the county, under existing law, is able to effectively sell off its parkland to another arm of county government, the Industrial Development Agency, IDA.
But doesn't it need the approval of state legislature?
Currently, it does not. In fact, I'm a co-sponsor of legislation carried by Assemblywoman Amy Pollin that would reverse this policy, which is just something specific to Westchester County, so that county sale of parkland would, in fact, have to get state legislation adopted. And one of the concerns that I have is that the issue of parkland throughout most of New York State does require a state-level review because of some particularities in our Westchester County Charter. There's a way to get around that, my view, and I would say the county executive shares this view. If it doesn't need to be done just by Westchester County, it shouldn't have to be done. Obviously, the county executive has also proposed replacement revenues, and that's one of the reasons why I think states should be supportive of Westchester County government.
But if it needs to be done, would you vote for it?
Well, I
Favor
don't
of
want to. I don't want it to be authorized. I think it really should go through a state level review, which is right now why I co-sponsor legislation that would block the ability of Westchester to single-handedly take this approach.
So then he doesn't have the support right now of the county legislators, even in Westchester, that he would need if they have to implement this.
No, but County Executive Latimer, who have worked with for many years, well before he was county executive, and continue to work with, he has said that he himself doesn't need to move forward on this proposal unless the state doesn't help Westchester County balance its budget. And I hope we do find ways to help the taxpayers of Westchester County.
Well, when I had interviewed him in January, he said that he wouldn't have to do it, provided that he could get an increase of non-property revenues like the sales tax on small businesses and sales over the internet to help the county keep down the property tax levy. But again, he said he would need the help of the state legislature.
Well, for
how
that,
do you feel about that?
No, for an increase in sales tax that does require the state to get involved. First of all, I do think that it looks likely that the state will authorize expanded sales taxes for internet purchases. That will do that around the state, but particularly for Westchester, the county has now requested an increase in the sales tax around Westchester, although outside of the big four cities in Westchester, Yonkers, Mount Vernon, New Rochelle, and White Plains, which have their own sales taxes. And my view, as it is with almost any local government, is if a local government wants something that involves, policy decision that doesn't impact the state interests like parkland, then we as representatives of the people of Westchester should try to be supportive, and I'm not here to stand in the way of that county decision, which they've authorized.
So you will vote for that?
If there's an opportunity and the negotiations are ongoing.
All right. I need a clarification, if you can give me, on this point.
Sure.
Governor Cuomo spoke recently in Mount Kisco, I think that was last week, where he pledged to fight the federal government's elimination of the deductibility of state and local taxes to 5.5% and to make permanent New York's tax cap. When his aides were pressed for further details, they declined to comment. Has the governor spoken to you or the legislative leadership about this? Was this political rhetoric, or is there anything in the works to actually implement this?
Sure. So I was at that address in Mount Kisco. Mount Kisco is the heart of my assembly district.
Yes.
My district office is in Mount Kisco. I live in White Plains, but the district goes up into northern Westchester. I'm very proud of all the 9 towns in my district. The issues laid out, so I've conflated 2 points. One, which is the fact that New York State, and more importantly, New Yorkers, are facing increased federal income taxes because of the federal tax changes that reduce the deductibility of SALT, state and local tax deductions. That is a tremendously important issue. The governor's administration and myself and many others have been working for over a year to address this point. We passed a bunch of legislation in last year's state budget to address that issue at the state level and also to empower local governments and school districts. But the work still continues. The state, under the governor's leadership, has a lawsuit pending. That's something I'm not involved in, but I am involved in an effort to work with local governments and school districts to challenge some pending IRS regulations that address the SALT issue, and I'm hopeful, and I believe that eventually we will be successful.
Could you be a little more specific, or?
No, I can. We authorized local governments and school districts to establish charitable funds in order to accept charitable donations and get in exchange a property tax credit. Effectively, what this does is it shifts what would be a property tax payment into a charitable payment. And folks might say, well, why should that be allowed to be deductible? And they might, on some principles, have a point, except for the fact that the federal government has always allowed deductions that are granted or credits that are granted by the state to exist separate from federal deductions. In other words, there's a long history of state tax benefits not counting against federal deductibility. The IRS has proposed regulations that would undo that. And we basically feel those regulations are not consistent with the state of the law. And therefore, if they finalize those regulations, they should be sued. And I believe in the end we will win, and that will be a big victory for Westchester taxpayers. But in the meantime, I'm hoping that local government school districts recognize the value of these charitable funds. And in the meantime, the governor is doing what he can. This gets to the point of the 5.5% rate to reduce, with the legislature, the income tax rate at the state level for middle class taxpayers. The governor pointed out that we're going to, or should have pointed out that we're going to get to that 5.5% level over the course of many years. But the idea is that every single year we are constantly reducing the income tax rate on middle class New York families, and that's something I heartily support.
If they have to take court action, that could take a long time, right?
Yeah, no, it's true. We will try to be as expeditious as possible. The only reason right now that we're in a holding pattern is because the IRS is taking its sweet time.
Right. No, I understand this.
But the removal of much of the deductibility of state and local taxes is something that fundamentally changes what it means to live in a county like Westchester, which of course is the highest property tax county in New York State. Right. It is the effective equivalent of raising property taxes for many New Yorkers 25 to 34%. That, we battle, rightly so, over individual decisions by local government school districts. Are they going to raise your taxes 1% or 2% or 3%? Are they going to, provide, what services can they provide for that money? We try to keep the state budget within a voluntary 2% cap, but you think 24%, 34%, those are huge increases. And, although of course there are going to be folks who rightly point out over time we should be trying to get down the tax burden on taxpayers, it's almost impossible to do that overnight in the same way that the federal government just overnight increased the property tax burden on Westchester families.
All right, another big issue, and you don't have to go into the details of the way Con Edison reacts, but just can the state legislature do anything to help the county government deal with the Con Ed gas moratorium on new natural gas connections scheduled to begin on March 15th? And I want to add this personally. I was at a hearing on the county level about 2 weeks ago.
I was at that hearing as well.
I don't have the kind of experience or career in government like you do, but I was shocked at the attitude of Con Ed. It was the first, I hear things, I speak to reporters to do the show, I meet with government leaders, but to just see these officers come in and just state things matter-of-factly, and their attitude is, well, what will be, and they didn't exhibit any feeling with regard to it's a crisis. And so, but one of the things that I want to see if you can help is one of the county legislators was talking to his peers, and he said, well, we don't really have the resources, meaning the advisors, to get after Con Ed to force them to answer certain questions. We're just not staffed for that. Does the county executive's office has it? Do they turn to the state government? Can you guys do anything to pressure? The
short answer to your question is yes. There are things we can do to help Westchester residents and businesses deal with the gas moratorium that will be coming into effect March 15th for any new customer. Some of those things we can do relate to funding. It's one of the things I'm focused on in the upcoming state budget. I would like NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, to have a program here in Westchester to help folks who can't turn to natural gas use alternative forms of energy or to promote gas efficiency. There's no reason we shouldn't do that. We've had very successful programs already in New York and in Westchester promoting electrical efficiency. So why we don't do the same for gas? I don't see any reason we shouldn't. And that's only going to be one part of the solution, but it's certainly something that New York State can be encouraging. The other role, though, we can play, and this gets to exactly what you're saying, is we can loudly and clearly convey how unacceptable the level of communication information from Con Edison has been. They really have no excuse for the fact that they took Westchester County government, businesses, and residents by total surprise when they announced this moratorium.
Are there any sanctions that you can put on them? Or, I mean, the fact that they are a monopoly and they go unchecked, there's nothing, there's no way they can be...
In addition to some of the public shaming that I'm frankly a part of, at that hearing that you were at, I denounced them, and also, frankly, the Public Service Commission that's supposed to oversee utility companies and did not alert Westchester to this possibility. I also believe that we should be looking at some of the legal options we have to basically say that a company that did not fulfill its basic requirement, that is to be able to provide its regulated product to the territory it serves, there should be strong consideration of consequences to that. That's, basically, as far as I'm concerned, they didn't do right by their customers or their shareholders in having a market failure like this. And you and I were talking before the show. I used to work in economics. I worked in antitrust economics. I totally understand that when there is a monopoly, the market's distorted. But when it comes to energy and heating fuel and so forth, there fundamentally is a greater responsibility when you're a regulated entity. And you're absolutely right. There's been sort of a cavalier attitude. It has unfortunately not changed much since the announcement of the moratorium. If I were involved in a company that announced a central failure like this, I would feel a sense of needing to be humble and open and transparent about how can we work together to fix things. That has not occurred.
All right, we're coming down towards the end for this program. I'm going to have you back because we have other issues. But I want to get this in because I think this is important. And you can give some of the details. I believe you worked to secure $7 million in bridge funding in White Plains and the village of Mount Kisco. You want to give us the details?
Two bridges that thousands of Westchester residents travel over every day. First, here in White Plains is a Westchester County bridge that addresses Main Street traveling over the Bronx River Parkway. That bridge was structurally deficient and needed repair. Westchester County otherwise would have been on the hook, and all Westchester County taxpayers would have been on the hook. But the Bridge New York funding helped Westchester County cover that cost. And also in Mount Kisco, the Preston Way Bridge that travels over the Metro-North Railroad tracks is one of three bridges in Mount Kisco that are in need of attention. And this is, at least a down payment on making sure that we're addressing those needs there north of Westchester. And for those of your viewers who don't know, Mount Kisco is sort of the hub of northeastern Westchester. So it's not just Mount Kisco residents. Folks from all surrounding towns come through for the commerce available in Mount Kisco. So this is something that very much needed, and it's not really within the financial ability of a small village to address three bridges at once.
I don't know if we're going to be able to get through this, but I'll briefly introduce it, and we've got about 2 minutes to go, and we'll address it in a future show if we have to.
Sure.
Does the MTA have a future? Do you think it has to be restructured to make it work? Should and can the governor take it over and have one person held responsible for instituting policy and efficiency.
So those are huge issues that probably can't be answered in 10 seconds, but I will say it's an area I
No,
very
you
much
have a
focus on.
minute.
Oh, thank you. I will say I have a tremendous interest in the future of the MTA and Metro North in particular. Before I was in elective office, I served on what's called the Metro North Railroad Commuter Council, which is the advisory body of that represents the railroad's riders. I was chairman of the Metro North Railroad Commuter Council.
Let me ask you, is it true that right now, the way it operates, there's no one responsible, centralized
That's true. It's sort of by design. On the other hand, the way it should work in theory is that you have an independent board of the MTA that gets to make decisions in the best interest of the metropolitan region. That part of things is definitely broken down. And so we sort of have the worst of both worlds, both not accountable, but also not independent-minded, trying to make the best public policy decisions. And that is something that really undermines the public's ability to trust the MTA. And when the MTA now is in need of funds, one of the big questions my constituents have is how can we trust the MTA with any more funds that we get their way, although I hope some way or another we can.
All right. I'm not, next time we do a show, I'm going to hit you for more details on how we can force restructuring and make somebody responsible, because, you know, not just other countries, but other parts of the country have superior transportation. And New York, which is always out in front, is last in this area, you know.
That's fair.
All right. David, I want to thank you very much for coming on this show. It's been a pleasure having you.
My real pleasure, Dennis. Thanks again.
All of our programs can be seen on demand for free on our website. Go to thedennisrudenshow.com. I can also be contacted by email at profile.issue@yahoo.com. We want to make the show interactive. So if you like it, tell us. And if you don't like it, tell me too, how you think we can make it better. All of our programs can be seen on Optimum Cablevision and Verizon Fios throughout Westchester County. Check your local cable calendar for the day, time, and channel. This is Dennis Rudin saying so long for Profiles and Issues.